I didn't destroy my life with words. I destroyed it by not using them. By choosing silence so consistently that it became my personality. If you had met me back then, you would have called me calm. Thoughtful. Maybe even wise. I rarely argued. Rarely demanded. Rarely made things complicated. People trusted me. What they didn't see was how much I was losing every time I stayed quiet. Silence felt powerful at first. It gave me control. Time to think. Distance from conflict. When something bothered me, I told myself it wasn't worth addressing. When something hurt, I convinced myself it would pass. When I wanted something deeply, I waited for the feeling to fade. And it always did. That's the thing about silence, it numbs desire before it ever turns into action. I learned to swallow reactions before they reached my face. To nod instead of disagreeing. To listen instead of interrupting with my own truth. I told myself this was maturity. That not every thought needed to be spoken. That not every feeling deserved space. But over time, silence stopped being a choice. It became my default. I stopped saying no because no required explanation. I stopped saying yes because yes created expectations. So I said nothing. I let decisions be made around me. I let conversations move past me. I let relationships define me without my participation. And the strangest part? It worked. Life continued. Bills were paid. Days passed. People assumed I was content. I assumed I was too. Until I noticed something subtle and terrifying. I had opinions, but only in my head. I had desires, but no language for them. I had boundaries, but never enforced them. Everything that mattered lived silently inside me. And what lives silently long enough begins to disappear. I remember the first moment I felt the cost. Someone asked me a direct question, not aggressive, not cruel. What do you want? I froze. Not because I didn't want to answer. Because I didn't know how to say it out loud. The words felt foreign. Unsafe. As if once spoken, they would demand consequences I wasn't prepared to face. So I smiled. Deflected. Changed the subject. And in that moment, something inside me retreated. I started noticing how often I felt misunderstood, and how rarely I corrected it. How often I felt invisible, and how actively I maintained that invisibility. I blamed others for not seeing me. But I was the one hiding. Silence protected me from rejection. But it also protected everyone else from knowing me. I lived in a state of emotional containment. Nothing spilled over. Nothing disrupted the surface. And because nothing broke, I believed nothing was wrong. That belief lasted for years. Years where I slowly trained myself not to react. Not to hope too loudly. Not to want too much. Not to speak unless I was certain my words would be welcomed. Certainty became my requirement. And certainty never arrived. I watched people around me argue, fail, confess, demand, change. They were messy. Uncomfortable. Alive. I told myself I was different. That I preferred peace. What I didn't realize was that peace built on silence isn't peace. It's absence. There were nights I lay awake, replaying conversations that never happened. Things I should have said. Things I almost said. In my mind, they sounded clear. Reasonable. In reality, they remained unspoken. And over time, even my internal voice softened. It learned not to push. It learned not to insist. It learned to whisper. That's when the loneliness set in. Not the loneliness of being alone. The loneliness of being unheard, even by yourself. I realized I had created a life where no one ever truly knew me. Not because they didn't care. Because I never let them. Silence had become my hiding place. And I had been hiding for so long that I forgot what I was protecting. One evening, sitting in a room that felt too quiet, a thought surfaced with unsettling clarity: if you keep choosing silence, one day there will be nothing left to say. That thought didn't frighten me. It saddened me. Because part of me already knew it was true. I wasn't losing my life dramatically. I was giving it away quietly. Sentence by sentence. Word by word. By choosing silence, every single time. Once I realized how much silence had taken from me, I expected to feel anger. I didn't. I felt shame. Because silence wasn't forced on me. I chose it. Again and again. I chose it when speaking felt risky. I chose it when honesty threatened comfort. I chose it when I feared that my words might change how people saw me. Silence made me predictable. Predictability made me safe. At least, that's what I told myself. I started noticing how deeply silence had shaped my life. How often I adjusted myself to fit into conversations instead of participating in them. How quickly I minimized my reactions to avoid being too much. How instinctively I swallowed disappointment before it could reach my voice. I had become fluent in restraint. People mistook that for depth. They said I was easy to be around. That I didn't bring drama. That I was understanding. They didn't realize how much effort it took to disappear politely. At some point, silence stopped being about peace. It became about fear. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being rejected. Fear of discovering that my truth wasn't welcome. So I kept it to myself. I told myself I was protecting others from discomfort. But slowly, the truth emerged: I was protecting myself from consequences. Because once you speak, things change. You can't unsay what you've said. You can't unreveal what you've revealed. Silence keeps everything reversible. And reversibility felt like control. The cost showed up in unexpected ways. I felt resentful without knowing why. Disconnected even when surrounded by people. Restless in moments that should have felt calm. I began replaying past interactions in my head, not arguments, but missed chances. Moments where a single honest sentence could have shifted everything. I didn't regret shouting. I regretted not speaking at all. That realization hurt in a quiet, persistent way. Because it meant I wasn't a victim of circumstance. I was a collaborator. I had collaborated with my own erasure. The internal pressure grew. Not as anxiety, but as weight. Like carrying a truth that wanted air. I started noticing how my body reacted whenever I suppressed something. A tight jaw. A shallow breath. A heaviness in my chest. Silence wasn't neutral. It lived somewhere in me. I tried, once, to break it. Just a little. A conversation came up where my opinion mattered. Where I felt that familiar pull to stay quiet. My heart started racing. I opened my mouth, and almost closed it again. But something inside me pushed. I spoke. Not dramatically. Not perfectly. Just honestly. The room didn't explode. No one stormed out. But the air changed. People looked at me differently. Not worse. Just differently. That moment terrified me more than silence ever had. Because it proved something dangerous: speaking wouldn't destroy my life. It would reveal it. And I wasn't sure I was ready to see what I had built around my silence. I noticed how some people leaned in when I spoke, curious, surprised. Others leaned away, unsettled. That reaction exposed a truth I hadn't wanted to face. Some relationships existed only because I stayed quiet. They relied on my silence to remain stable. And stability built on silence is fragile. The more I experimented with speaking, the clearer the dilemma became. If I continued choosing silence, my life would remain calm, but empty. If I chose to speak, things would change, unpredictably, uncomfortably. Either way, there was a cost. But only one option allowed me to exist fully. I realized that silence had protected me from conflict, but it had also protected me from intimacy. You can't be known without risk. You can't be seen without exposure. I had chosen safety over connection for so long that connection now felt dangerous. That was the dark secret at the center of it all. I wasn't quiet because I was peaceful. I was quiet because I was afraid. Afraid of being seen clearly. Afraid of being judged honestly. Afraid of discovering that my voice mattered, and that I had buried it anyway. The choice became unavoidable. Either I continued living a life where nothing was said and nothing truly happened. Or I accepted the discomfort of speech, the messiness of honesty, the risk of losing people who only knew my silence. I didn't feel brave. I felt cornered by my own awareness. Because now I knew what silence was costing me. And pretending otherwise was no longer possible. Breaking my silence didn't happen all at once. There was no single confession. No dramatic speech where everything finally came out. That's not how people like me change. I had spent years training myself to stay quiet. You don't undo that with one brave moment. You undo it slowly, painfully, sentence by sentence. The first real shift came when I understood something simple and terrifying: silence wasn't neutral anymore. Every time I chose not to speak, I wasn't keeping the peace. I was choosing a version of my life where I didn't exist fully. That realization made silence unbearable. I started noticing how often I paused before speaking, not to think, but to calculate. To predict reactions. To minimize impact. I had lived my life like a negotiator inside my own mouth. And I was exhausted. So I began choosing differently. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Just honestly. I said things that felt unfinished. Opinions that weren't polished. Feelings that didn't come with explanations or apologies. Each time, my body reacted like I was in danger. Heart racing. Hands cold. Breath shallow. Fear didn't disappear. But something else appeared alongside it. Relief. Not because people always responded well, they didn't. But because I wasn't betraying myself in the moment anymore. Some conversations ended awkwardly. Some relationships shifted. A few cracked under the weight of truth. That hurt. More than I expected. Because it forced me to confront a painful fact: some people didn't love me. They loved my silence. They loved how easy I was to be around. How little space I took. How rarely I complicated things. When I stopped being that person, the connection weakened. I mourned those losses quietly. Not because they were wrong, but because they were built on a version of me that no longer existed. I also mourned myself. The years I spent choosing quiet over clarity. The moments I swallowed words that could have changed my direction. The opportunities one lost not because I failed, but because I never spoke. That grief didn't destroy me. It sharpened me. It made me understand that regret doesn't come from speaking and being wrong. It comes from staying silent and never knowing. I stopped trying to be liked by everyone. Not intentionally, it just became impossible. When you speak honestly, you give up control over how you're perceived. That loss of control terrified me. But it also freed me. For the first time, reactions felt real. Agreement meant something. Disagreement meant something. Distance meant something. Nothing was imagined anymore. My life became messier, but more solid. I noticed something unexpected. The more I spoke, the more I felt present. Moments lasted longer. Decisions carried weight. Time stopped slipping through me unnoticed. Even difficult emotions felt grounding. At least I was here to feel them. I learned that silence doesn't just hide you from others. It hides you from yourself. When you don't speak your truth, you slowly stop hearing it. And one day, you wake up unsure of who you are without your restraint. I had almost reached that point. What saved me wasn't courage. It was honesty fueled by exhaustion. I was too tired to keep disappearing. I still choose my words carefully. Silence itself isn't evil. But now, it's a choice, not a reflex. Now, when I stay quiet, it's because I want to listen. Not because I'm afraid to be seen. If you're listening to this and something feels uncomfortably familiar, if your life feels calm but distant, if people think they know you but something essential remains unspoken, this is what I learned the hard way: silence will never protect the parts of you that want to live. It will only keep them small until they forget how to speak. You don't need to shout. You don't need to explain everything. You don't need to fight. You just need to stop disappearing. I chose silence for years. And it cost me moments I'll never get back. But it didn't cost me my future. Because the moment I started speaking, imperfectly, awkwardly, honestly, my life stopped feeling like something that was happening around me. It became something I was inside of again. I'm not fearless now. I'm not loud. But I'm here. And after years of silence, that feels like the bravest thing I've ever said.